Walter, caves 9 and 10 are the earliest temples on the site of Ajanta that we know about. But your ideas have given much value to these two caves because there were developments in the 5th century that these caves received. Would you like to explain to us some details?
I'm very interested in how those early caves, which interestingly we don't know what the date is. I mean, everyone disagrees. Some say 3rd century BC, 2nd century BC for cave 10, 1st century BC for cave 10. It's amazing that we really can't make our mind up exactly what date they should be given. And if we do, it has to be within a range of, say, 50 years or so. In the 5th century, within the less than 20-year period, I try to put on that sequence of 20 years, I try to put every single motif at the site at a particular point on that sequence. If you shift the date of one thing up a year, then other things also has to come up. So everything, it's all a web that's very tightly woven together. Now you can't do that with the early caves, but you can do it with the decoration that we find now, the 5th century decoration that was added to the early caves. There is, of course, a wonderful cycles of early painting. Again, we don't know exactly what date they are, but they're about 2,000 years old. And those are very beautiful paintings, covered with grime, obviously from the oil lamps that were used in worship, because many of the stupa itself would have been worshipped, and quite possibly the images themselves on the walls would be illuminated, so you could see them with oil lamps. In any case, cave 10 especially is very blackened. Now that says something rather interesting, and that is that the cave was not ever abandoned. I think that's true. It went from its life around from 100 BC to the 5th century. It was always used for worship, I would suspect. We have some evidence of that. The Chinese pilgrim Fa Yuan, that's right, thanks. The Chinese pilgrim leaves a record. He says he didn't go to the caves. He said the region is very dangerous. He said so it wasn't possible for him to go because the region's upset. But he says some monks do go to the caves, but they have to fly in, something like that, he says. What happened when the courtiers of King Harashena, Emperor Harashena, in the around 460, where did they worship when they first came? Well, they obviously worshipped in those old caves. I think they were probably in continual use. The viharas associated with the old caves were also used for the monks to sleep in, I suppose, or maybe at first the most important people could take whatever places were available, because the site was still just a cliff that was being cut away at first. So I want to talk a little about the decoration of the cave. But let me first say that there is a very distinct difference between the patronage of those early caves, the so-called Hinayana caves, and the later caves. The early caves were obviously a community effort, something like Sanchi, where 600 people each give a piece of the railing and things like that, with their name on it. And the names are in Cave 10 on the facade. You see it says the facade is a gift of Katahadi, and a wall says a gift of someone else, a third one. You see another other words, everyone was getting in on the act and getting the benefit from it. Now, in the 5th century, every single cave was done by one specific person. The image in the cave belonged to that person. The benefit that was received when the image was finally dedicated and brought to life, that benefit went to the owner of the cave, you could say, and to his family. And very generously, those people point out very often that the benefit should go to their mother and father and to the whole world. Apparently, there's quite a lot of benefit from making a Buddha image of perhaps a particular size and a particular beauty. It resonated into the future with its power. And of course, the caves were intended from the inscriptions too. We know they should last as long as the sun and the moon shine.
Walter, so what kind of changes this cave number 10 underwent in the 5th century AD?
I believe that when the courtiers came to the site to start a renaissance in about 462, something like that, that they used that cave for worship. They used the attached Hinayana Vihara for residence, and they kept using it. The truth is, there was no place to live at the site for the first 5, 6, 7 years. You had to dig out the cave. You had to make cells, and I think it took almost a decade before the site was ready for many people to actually be housed in it. I think that the old caves obviously served some purpose for residence and worship. And I would say there were no changes made in them. Courtiers were too busy with their own caves and with the new chaitya halls, everything was taking their attention. There was no particular reason to go and do anything special to these caves. But the fact still remains, from a 5th century, here you are at the sort of height of the golden age, and this actually wonderfully impressive, huge Chaitya Hall, Cave 10 and Cave 9, a little smaller but the same. Those were sitting there in their old clothes, you see, and they obviously wanted to do something about it. So what I think happened, I'm quite sure this is the way it was done, some sort of committee was formed. I don't think it was a single person. There's no inscription that would suggest that, for one thing, but it's a huge job that seems to have been very well planned by some authority, which I suspect was a group of people. I suspect, there's no proof of this, a group of people that decided to redecorate the old caves. Now, the interesting thing about it is the cost of the decoration mimics the course of Ajanta's development. I mean, what I'm really saying is that the cost of the decoration is 3 stages, and they're very distinct. The first stage is when they decided to decorate the cave and to redecorate the cave, really. And that was when Harashena was still ruling. The future looked wonderful. Future, happy future looked endless, and so they were doing it in a most sensible way. You can see they started redecorating the huge ceiling. It's a huge cave, and they had to bring in all sorts of wood and put up scaffolds. An absolutely huge job just to do the ceiling, but they did it, and the whole ceiling got done. Then they came down and they started decorating the side aisles, and this was all during, you could say, the Golden Age. Much of it is done rather almost like wallpaper, except Buddha images, one Buddha image after the other. But they were not done in general. Just like the ceiling was lotus, red lotus medallions, and the whole ceiling. I mean, it was it was done efficiently. Decoration of the aisles, though, it's all Buddha images and lotuses. That was done efficiently too. And then they started. Here we're still in the golden period. And they started to decorate the pillars on the left of the cave, starting on the first pillars at the front, starting logically at the top, because you paint a pillar. If you paint a pillar, you start at the top and work down. They got quite a number of the pillars done, finished at the top. They're probably using the old scaffolding, some of the old scaffolding that they could reserve, not take down completely when they took it down from doing the upper levels of the cave. They started at the upper left on these pillars, and they got them down maybe a dozen pillars done that way, and then the world changed. Suddenly, Harashena had died. The whole site went into a clench. Everyone who was making caves rushed their Buddha images to completion if they could possibly do it, and then they got out. And in the cave, if it was a committee, the committee decided, we've got to hurry now. We do have a few months that we can work, because all through the site, I mean, when Harashena died, there still was, maybe there even was hope that the Ashoka, that the Vakataka army would ward off the Ashoka aggressors. Maybe there was some hope early in 478, but in any case, whether there was hope or not, there was certainly turmoil. And so then what they decided to do, it was very obvious from the way the first phase of the cave was started in 477 that they were going to paint every pillar. The pillars are 8-sided old pillars. You see, Hinayana type pillars, of course. They were made in the 100 BC or so. And they were going to decorate not only the front, but the back. Everything was going to be decorated. The whole cave was going to be totally transformed into a 5th century decorated monument. But now the committee sat around and decided, what shall we do? And they decided we cannot possibly afford, either in terms of time or maybe money too, to continue this wholesale decoration of every pillar and every wall. They decided just to put Buddha images starting at the bottom, actually, because the tops had already been done. In one case, the top had been done. They decided to put Buddha images on the most visible faces. So when you walk into the cave, you can see the pillars have 8 faces. The faces that you are looking at as you walk into the cave, that they put Buddha images on, and the next to it the faces of the pillars that were aimed straight into the center of the hall. So the 2 most important faces were decorated all the way down to the end. But that was all that was done, you see. And in the aisles, instead of doing Buddha images, they decided we'll just do lotuses, cheap lotuses, probably 10 rupee lotuses, instead of what they would 30 rupee Buddha images that they would have put. So they just everything is reduced in terms of time and in terms of money in the second phase, which is 478. Then those patrons were gone. All of the great patrons had left by the end of 478, and the local people and the monks who were still, of course, resident at the site, monks still living in the caves, they flooded in and started putting intrusions, just taking over the cave for their own selfish purposes.
Walter, you were also saying that there is a second and the third phase in cave number 10 when they were redecorating. Could you say something about that?
The second phase was basically putting a well-organized, you could say, kind of procession, or it looks like a procession of Buddha images going down toward the stupa. I mean, when you come in the cave, you see all these standing Buddhas, not just one row. Actually, originally there were 3 rows. They started at the bottom because that was quick. Then they came up, and by the time they got a little over eye level, you see the original, in the first phase they were starting at the top because that's how you properly decorate a pillar. Now they're not interested in properly decorating the pillar. They just wanted to get those beautiful or powerful Buddha images, and so when you come in the cave, now of course many of them are gone, but you look down and there's a whole sequence of 2 Buddhas on every pillar, right down to the end. The world changed, darkened, of course, and the site was in collapse, and the people that were in charge of redecorating the caves gave up any interest, I suppose, any longer, and new people came in who were not interested in redecorating the caves. They were interested in using the caves as a ground for their, we say intrusive, but they say sacred, images of all painted in this case. Many of them painted very quickly. Many of them inscribed either by the monks who were resident at the site. That's probably where the monks were. The monks who gave things probably were the monks at the site, or local people. So there are many inscriptions, a few dozen inscriptions. Probably not. The painter who did the painting probably didn't do the inscriptions. I suspect painters couldn't write. But they must have had other people come in. This may be why many of the things are not inscribed, because you're waiting for the person to come and inscribe them, or maybe you didn't care. The Buddha knew it was given by you, something like that. And now what they did is take any spot that was good. They wanted the best spots for their own image, of course, and they wanted something that was well lit. They wanted something that everyone could see, and so they gradually started filling in where the second phase hadn't done anything, wasn't even interested in doing anything, but all around second phase things, and at the back of the pillars, as the cave got more and more filled with inscriptions, people had to go around behind the pillars where the light was bad and put their inscriptions there. They still must have had the same kind of sacred power, but they certainly, you have to hunt for them today sometimes, and so the cave is filled with dozens and dozens of private inscriptions, all suggestive of a time where the world actually was in collapse, and where hasty work was being done. It doesn't mean it was always bad, because the artists who did it by that time, probably many of them couldn't do bad work. They weren't interested in doing bad work. And if you're painting a Buddha image, there's probably something to be said for doing it well, even if you're just the artist who is a kind of secondary person in the process.
Frequently you are suggesting about these painters but not giving any clue to who these painters were indeed. Is there any possibility that they were none other than the monks themselves? Say, for example, in today's Tanka paintings in Tibet, these painters are none other than the monks, Buddhist monks, who know the subject and medium and material and iconography, what colors required, what is the iconometry, etc. Is there any possibility that the Ajanta painters were none other than the monks themselves?
It's a very good question, and I certainly can't answer it with any authority. I don't know. My feeling is that while the site was vigorously developing, the painters who had come from different cities, different towns of the empire, and were used to doing scenes of the sacred scenes or even secular scenes. They transferred their abilities to the walls of the new caves, and so there's really no stylistic development that you can see, because this cave is being painted by someone from Baroda, someone from Aurangabad, someone from here. They all came with their own style. There wasn't any painting at the site until at least 468, the first brush touched the stone. That's 10 years before the site collapsed. So all of the painting at the site goes into this 10-year period. 478, this period of everything falling apart because of Harashena's death. So both in 478 and in 479 and 80, there wasn't any demand for Jataka tales or tales of war and all this thing. Only demand was for Buddha images. Buddha images, maybe stupas you could paint, and pictures of Avalokiteshvara as the Lord of Travelers. You can figure out for yourself why that was Avalokiteshvara, the great Lord who protects you from the dangers of the road, seems to have had a renaissance of his own in the period when the site was falling apart. I think the painters that did the beautiful scenes throughout the caves and the ceilings and things like that, no one cares about ceilings in the period of disruption, unless you're making a beautiful Buddha image in Cave 6, for instance, Upper 6, taking over cells, converting the cells that were monk cells into fancy shrines, and the ceilings of those cells would be painted to honor the Buddha. I mean, in other words, you're making a beautiful shrine for the Buddha, and you paint it as well as you can, and you paint as much as you can, and you please him as much as you can. And then you put your inscription on it. If you're lucky, you get your inscription, and if you're lucky, you get out of there and you have eternal benefit. So I think the painters shifted for practical reasons to being the painters of Buddha images. One of the things that people could work on, I haven't worked on it myself, but I can see that there are certain of these intrusive images done when the site was in collapse that have the same coloring, the same kind of brushwork that you see in some of the paintings. I think someone could do an interesting study of relationship.
Walter, I would like to divert your attention now to the facade and of both the caves, cave 9 and 10. As we know, the inscription there says that is on the right side of the big arch on cave 10. That is Vashati Putasya Katahadino Gharamukdanam. The son of Vasishta donated the wooden facade, and there is also some kind of cut inside the arch in the rock beams and rafters that suggests that there was indeed some kind of wooden facade that was installed or fixed on the face of the big arch. If that is the case, that there was a wooden facade over there, and similar proof is there that in cave 9 also some kind of wooden facade was fixed at some point of time. In that case, how do we explain the presence of the intrusive sculptures?
Certainly you're right that there were wooden fittings. I think for practical purposes, to create a screen to keep monkeys out and birds out. I mean, there's all of the caves have, it seems to me, some concern about the uninvited coming in. Of course, all those fixtures are gone. There is, of course, remaining wonderful teak beams. There used to be in Cave 10 and Cave 9 incredible structures of beams mimicking structural chaitya halls, you could say, but they have long since been taken away, probably by the villages to use for cooking fires, to use for burning, cremations, who knows? But there are a few chaitya halls left, such as Kandani, for instance, where there are a remarkable piece of these huge teak beams still in place, too far away for people to trouble to take them out of the jungle. I suspect those wooden structures were still there in the 5th century. I mean, certainly if there's a kind of committee redoing the cave, they must have either the facade, the wood was still there, which is quite possible because there are many places in India where the wooden fixtures have survived for centuries. I don't think that had a great problem with I don't think the intrusions, and some of the intrusions are very beautiful because the sculptors who did the intrusions, and this would be in 479, 480, in the period of disruption, the sculptors by then were highly trained. They could turn out a beautiful Buddha image very easily, I would say, and they could do it cheaply too, because the world was falling apart. The original patronage was gone by the period of disruption. What were they to do? Where were they to go? You can see the sequences. Some things are finished, some are not finished. I mean, you can actually, I think, date the sequences of the finished and half-finished and barely started images. You can see how people were taking advantage, first, of course, at the lower levels where it's easy and you don't have to build scaffolding, and then gradually going up to the top. That's particularly true in Cave 10. You have, 9 too. I mean, in 9 especially, you have wonderful intrusive images violating, you could say, the original attitude of the people who made the caves, who wouldn't show the Buddha in human form. I mean, that was a no-no, certainly, in the Hinayana period. And so you have this shift from what we call the Hinayana to what we call the Mahayana. Is probably Mula Savastavadan, according to Schlingloff, and he's the one that knows, if anyone knows.
The one last word I wanted to know from you was that, let's assume the time, nearly, if the facade intrusions, those big Buddhas on the left and the right side of the facade of Cave 9 and 10, are 479 or 480, how would they come if they were already painted? Because we would assume that by 477, and by your explanation, the painting wood was started when the Harisena was still ruling. So we would assume that the entire facade, whether with a wooden structure or without wooden structure, must have been very lavishly decorated.
I think you're right. It certainly would have been painted, and that wasn't really a concern of the people in the period of disruption. They certainly wouldn't cover over a Buddha image. And so I think you could say the painting of the facade included no Buddha images unless they had all washed off by the rains, which of course could happen. And that can happen very quickly sometimes. So it's a very interesting point. I would say that all through the site, you can see that intruders who went into the caves, if the caves were alive, if the image had been dedicated, they came into the caves and used any good spot. I mean, just as in Cave 9, they chose the most perfect places. The first people there got the best spots, and the things up there which are not even finished, just sketched out maybe, done by the people who came too late. So it was all get there fast if you can kind of thing.
Which cave probably received the first intrusion? Could it be 9 and 10? to receive the first intrusive images?
Uh, the I can't imagine that these sacred caves, just as the 5th century Chaitya halls, it didn't attract particular interest. So I would say probably if you had to rank where someone would put their image, they would put it on one of the Chaitya halls. Maybe they'd I don't know whether they'd put it on the 5th century Chaitya halls or the early Chaitya halls, but I think that was probably a desirable place to put your images.
Have you worked out in the entire site which is the cave which received the first intrusion?
I would say the first intrusions all through the site are the ones that are in the most desirable positions, where the stone is already smooth, where it's very visible, where it's close to or visibly close to the shrine. I would say that all of those factors played a part. Now, both of the images in Cave 9 were inscribed, probably painted inscriptions, certainly not inside. You can see underneath, it's only one inscription in Cave 26, two huge Buddhas, again, taking the best spots, are inscribed.